Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of the Big Sky SBIR Accelerator. So, really happy that y'all can join us today. We get to talk today a little bit more about actually these customers, the end users. And I'm really hoping that we have a lot of interaction. Love to hear some of your inputs as we're talking about here. And I'm going to bring a different perspective here. I sold software for 15 plus years. I still feel like sales is kind of in my blood. Um, and and this is this time, especially this one, I think. All of the other courses, we're very tactical. Do this, do that. Here's some things to be successful with SBIR, DoD and NASA. Let's check this box. Let's approach this way, even as fuzzy as those things can be. Today, we really want to talk about looking at customers, end users, identifying the different types of markets that may be appropriate for your technology. And so I think you can already hear this, right? You guys are already selling your software or products. You're in the world, you're identifying markets. So please, love to hear, have you chime in because we have a few different examples that we're going to pull up, but really, I think the examples are going to best come from you to the extent that you can share information. Again, what stays here or what is said here stays here. However, do not disclose anything that you don't want to disclose. We're not forcing you to say anything that way, but happy to have you guys share. So thanks, everyone. And with that, Del, let you kind of kick off the rest of the day.
Great. Thanks, Anne. So, as Anne said, welcome to our week 6. Today we're really going to focus on, at the kind of core of it, customers and pivots. In Anne's opening, she talked about how, a lot of her focus on that kind of customer, that customer discovery and validation is backed up by her sales career. So you're going to get opinions very focused for that. And I've done quite a bit of customer discovery myself, but my customer discovery was actually in an entirely, let's call it, different area. My customer discovery was focused on project and product impacts. And you may be thinking, well, Del, what's the difference in that? Well, it's actually a huge difference because what you find out in there and what you're going to do is, well, it should radically change how you're envisioning your product, how you envision the what's in the box that you deliver, and really kind of how that matches towards the stuff that you're going to try and accomplish. And I mean, really at the heart of it, even during a phase 1, when you approach one of these major contracting agencies like, DoD, NASA, DHS, the ones that are solution focused, the ones that actually want you to build something for them, the ones that actually want to purchase something from you. And so that's going to be like kind of our big takeaways that we want people to kind of go away from with this is what do we mean by customer? What do we mean by customer discovery? How's that informing your project itself? And how do you need to think of those pivots? And what do we actually mean by pivots? So today, again, real quick, we're going to have just a very short, very, very short touch point on what we talked about last week. And we're going to dive into one of the foundational things that a lot of people, particularly in like a defense or NASA space, need to understand is the difference between a customer and an end user, value proposition, and why that actually drives towards really future success. And we don't mean just phase 2, we mean post phase 2, we mean phase 3, we mean sales, sole sourcing, that pivoting, and then from that pivoting, get into our one of the major points for particularly when you're thinking about like DoD, NASA, SBIR, and STTR awards is commercialization versus commercial market. But last week we really talked about that kind of effective storytelling. So how do you approach putting together the information for these proposal packages? What goes in it? What makes a good one? What do you need to focus on? And a lot of the information for what we consider matters, what we consider is something that's important, what we consider is something that actually makes we talked about the three C's for proposals: complete, compliant, and compelling. So last week was all about the compelling part. And everything we talked about last week are just things that are good, some just real baseline setting. And now, your job going forward is to figure out, well, how do I map that to what I'm doing? How do I take this core and modify it? Because everything we talk about is always a foundational. Here's something to think about, and nothing is ever an answer. Really, it's the start to a question you should be asking yourself and answering for your business, for your product, for your pathway, for your rampway, whatever the focus of that answer point is. But a couple just key, real quick highlights. A good proposal and effective technical storytelling is really a make or break. How you approach information, the verbiage you decide to use, how you transition between different sections, how you make something that is a complete narrative and it kind of flows along, and be effective. Be effective in using white space. Imagery is a really good thing, but make sure it's imagery that matters. It's imagery that adds to the story, doesn't dilute or confuse it. And just like with imagery, and just like everything else in your proposal, make it so that someone immediately understands exactly what you yourself are trying to get across. Never leave stuff up for interpretation. Never keep gaps open. Give them the gap, close the gap for them, and then ask them at the end, well, what'd you learn from that gap? It should be something that's effective. It should be something that means that now you're really interested in what I'm, at the end of the day, pitching to you. So let's actually, get started with this session. So customers versus end users. So just some key definitions for you. A lot of times whenever you're dealing in, let's call it particular domains of areas, you will almost always have a customer and an end user. If you open a taco cart, your customer and your end user are the same. The person that is buying that taco is the person that's going to enjoy that taco. Well, hopefully they enjoy your taco. They're going to benefit from it because it was money well spent to fill their belly with good food. But in a lot of other areas, defense is a really big one. Space is always a really big one. Health is probably the largest, where you have a big, big differentiator between what's a customer and what's an end user. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times the people that are actually paying you for it are really not the ones that are implementing it. They're not the ones that are actually utilizing it. They're not the ones that are gaining the most benefit. So kind of at the heart of it, the customer is the one that foots the bill. They give you the cash for the thing. The end user is the one that it's either passed down to or benefits the most. And how's that kind of mapping towards stuff? Well, obviously with contracting agencies, because of the way that systems are set up, because of the way that contracts are set up, because of the way that procurement offices are set up, the thing you're developing is going to go into maybe a warfighter's hands, maybe an engineer's hands, the hands of somebody that is going to effectively be able to use it to solve a critical problem that is keeping them from completing their mission, getting the most benefit out of it, kind of whatever that is. But they're not the ones actually parsing out the money. That doesn't come out of, their paycheck. There was a set aside that happened, and money went into a pot that said, okay, well, here's your budget for this area. We're going to set aside this portion of it to do these types of things, look at these types of products, look at these kind of future offerings, future development, how we can influence that, kind of whatever that setup is. And then they make a decision, and they make a decision based on, a specific criteria, a lot of which we're going to kind of get in a little bit here further. But there has to be something that they really say, this is going to benefit our people, not necessarily benefit me individually, not necessarily benefit my office. So it's always an office of something or another that actually gave you the money, but it's not an office of something or another that's going to utilize it. So particularly when you're thinking about doing something like customer discovery, where we're going to dive pretty deeply into, there's a lot of different things you need to ask, and there's a lot of different kind of focuses that you need to take because customers and end users, what they want to get out of something, although there will be some core alignment, the actual need that you are developing and delivering on for them oftentimes are very radically different. End users have something they have to get around. They want a solution. They want something that makes them more effective, solves an issue for them. Customers want to save something. So customers want to save wasted man hours. They want to actually reduce time. They want to save an ability. And then the product that you're delivering enables that ability by being able to actually do something for the person that faces it. So whenever you're thinking through customer and end user, always keep that in mind, particularly in these contracting agency spaces. Now, when you're thinking of how you are moving forward and how contracting, particularly in SBIR and STTR, is very different, is that you're almost going to have a different focus of import based on who you are targeting and kind of what you are doing. And it changes between your different phases. In your phase one, your dependency is really on the customer. You are speaking towards that larger feasibility. You're trying to convince them that you can do something, cheaper, faster, stronger, better, the Daft Punk model of product development. There's something here that we can actually really, really kind of deliver here for you that matches your goals as a money paying organization. You're still going to want to actually, definitely talk about the end user because at the end of the day, the customer is driving towards something for an end user. But what you're focusing on for benefits, the kind of intention points, things like that, are highly dependent on who is that customer and what they are actually doing. That's why a lot of times whenever you're doing pre-proposal setup and prep, it's always a good idea to dive into particularly like a defense topic. You'll see there'll be language in there that'll say, hey, this unit or this or that. And even though it's a Navy topic, it'll be the 54th Squadron. So find out what's important to the 54th Squadron. Now, that's going to not radically change, but in a phase two, you're really going to shift the intention of what the phase two is going to be. The intention is no longer to kind of drive a end value towards that customer by convincing them of something. The intention is to start to modify your results towards that end user's pain point. So now you are saying, okay, well, in the phase one, we said we could solve this problem you have. And here's how we're going to do it for this really grand benefit. And now in a phase two, it's like, okay, well, we said we could solve it. Now we actually got to solve it. What is this going to actually, kind of require and take for us to do this? What do we need to really start paying attention to? What do we need to focus on? And what is that kind of transition plan? Which we've talked about transition plans before, and we'll talk a little bit more about them through here. That transition plan is, okay, how do I go from this? There's this really cool thing I've been working on and developing too. Now it's in your hands. You can use it. You can utilize it. It's there for your benefit. It's going to drive into exactly what you need. And so why does this matter? Well, kind of remember back to last week when we talked about messaging and your differentiator between who you need to speak about, kind of let's call it a benefit matrix between a phase one and phase two, changes the messaging. changes the language you use, changes actually a lot of the not necessarily information that you're going to include in your proposal package, but the nature of how you include it. So the vernacular you're using, the terminology you're using, how you actually structure things, how you talk about that. Because keep in mind that SBIR and STTR are always a future forward kind of intention when you are putting together your proposal and when you have a successful proposal. So what you're saying for that future intention, what you're saying for that alignment needs to be messaged towards that who is actually going to be the biggest beneficiary here. And that's going to follow through. So your work plan needs to really be around that. A lot of times in your phase one, you'll see that, they have objectives of do this feasibility study, deliver this report, do this thing. And that's going to be on the, well, we think that we can address this by here, and here's what it's actually going to deliver to you. In that phase two, you're going to have a lot of field testing. You're going to have a lot of validation with end users. You're going to put it through hardening, go through logistics, rapid deployment, scalability and sustainability testing, penetration testing, those things that actually make it a usable system, a usable piece of kit, whatever that usability factor is. A lot of the work is going to really focus down towards that and really needs to be mapped in those areas. And now you go, well, Bill, that sounds great for, an SBIR and STTR, but what about anything else? It really follows the product development methodology just in and of itself. Keep in mind that, and we set this up, at the very beginning, a agency like NASA, they are going to be a first customer. They're not going to be your only customer. And with the way NASA goes, they're definitely not going to be your biggest customer. Someone like DoD/DOW, they'll be your first customer. They might actually be your biggest customer. Who knows? Depends on what you're doing. But they're going to be a first customer. So taking this same kind of methodology and example, you're going to copy this over whenever you're looking at how do we get this into other markets? What else do we need to do? How do we need to validate that we have this product for, the servicemen in the 54 Squadron that, fly Apache helicopters? And I realize I just, mixed up a lot of different agencies and service components there, but I ain't in the military. But that kind of, okay, well, this is who this is for. But now it's well, now we need to actually put this for, helicopter mechanics at airfields. They're going to have a same kind of probably generalized problem. The things they need to do, the ways they need to go about it, how this actually serves them is going to be very different. There is a concept called green paint when you're developing defense solutions. And it's just history side. It's known as green paint because of the way they painted army vehicles back after World War II. But it's a concept called green paint. That's what you're giving to the military. But now you have to strip the green paint off of it. There are certain things they needed that were specific towards the way the military operates, the controls they have to go through, the classifications of information, how they have to protect, secret, top secret, whatever. Well, now you have to figure out, okay, well, we're going to have to remove all the bells and whistles and get this back to a base, let's call it widget. What do we need to modify on this widget to mean that it's available to anybody out there that suffers a similar issue and a kind of similar problem? And just as kind of a heads up on approach there, now that we gave you okay, well, this is how you can possibly go about it. Well, now you need to actually start charting things out. Remember, we talked pretty well and pretty deeply about the impact of imagery last week when we talked about effective proposals. Well, guess what's the best way you can actually do any of these charts, any of these mappings? It's visual. Remember, humans are visual creatures. We not necessarily understand it more, but we interpret it better, and we immediately recognize connection points when it is something that is visual. If it is just a 5-page paper that you write about what your customer needs and who actually kind of matters, it's going to be hard to, one, parse through that information if you ain't you, but then two, also really hard to kind of further categorize it back. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to go over, particularly today when we talk about tools and resources, keep in mind that what we're really talking about is visual resources, something that you can put together, you can immediately understand it, you can give to a team member, they're going to be able to grasp onto it. And the reason that's so important for team members to be able to kind of immediately grasp onto it is that different people are going to know different things. Different people are going to see things in a different way. And different job roles and different functions might have different viewpoints. We kind of teed up that fact when we talked about, particularly when it comes to customer discovery and alignment. Anne comes from a sales background, and she has a certain methodology that she goes through that speaks towards a certain vision for it. From a project and product development standpoint, I have an entirely, not necessarily an entirely different, vision there. But there's quite a lot of difference when you talk about the what transitions this from an interest to a customer versus what do we need to be aware of as we are going through the product development cycle, and how does that impact our end result? So when you're doing one of these visual things, a really good example to actually go through is what we call an influence map. I double check. Yep, that is the next slide. So when you're going through an influence map, there are some key differentiators and key identifiers you want to make on there. You want to actually be able to visually map out not just that customer and end user, but the people that kind of matter and the decision between we develop this, you want to buy it from me, you give me money for this. Kind of at the core, an influence map charts the, let's just call it the nuance of revenue flow for your company, and particularly for an intended customer. It charts, okay, well, we're getting money from them, but how do they get their money? Who tells them what to buy? Who influences what they actually purchase? Who might actually sabotage this process because of different rules, different regulations? You want to be able to chart the interplay between all of those different things. And so what's one of these look like? Well, it's something like this. This was actually an influence map that a team that I led through an I-Core project did. And I won't get into the technology, but essentially it was being able to use autonomous unmanned, mainly air vehicles, to deliver like key nutrients and pesticides for fields and for farmers. And the expectation they had coming into it was, okay, well, we're going to sell these to the farm owners. And makes sense, right? It's for farm owners. They're the ones that are going to buy it. But when you actually start talking to the farm owners and talking to those people, they go, well, I mean, we don't buy that stuff. We hire somebody that does that kind of stuff for us. Well, okay. Well, now we got to go talk to them. Then you go talk to them and they say, well, yeah, I mean, we do that stuff. That's the kind of stuff that, we might be interested in, but we don't really make those decisions. Other people are actually telling us what to do. Well, okay, now there's someone else that actually, we have to go talk to as this person makes this decision. It filters down, it flows down. Where does the money come from, and how does the money get transitioned between here's a need or here's a want to here's a need towards how we're actually going to solve it. So this was, a couple of month-long process of talking to multiple types of these individuals. But this is what we came up with this influence map. Where does a decision actually lie? Who actually influences on how people make these purchasing decisions? Who actually decides it? Because again, sometimes the people that have the money don't make the decision. A decision is made and then they just parcel the money out. And then who could actually change and almost sabotage the way we do business because of different decisions they make that could either influence it, it could open up new avenues, it could take avenues away. So as you see from here, these are all color coded, and you can see that, there's a few of them that are double-ended on here, but they're directional arrows. So it's where does the direction lie? What do we need to know about that kind of key relationship between those two entities? And how is this going to change the way we do business and the way we speak towards potential customers, the way we actually market it, the way we make those decision points for our business that matter for our future success?
Bill, I'm going to give you a good example, and I get to talk about that slide too. I was just talking with Dell knows this person. Well, I'll tell you later, Dell. Um, Person who was involved with the DoD program office for many, many years. We were having a conversation and talking about a specific prime, large DoD prime defense contractors. I'm not going to name names, so it's not that specific. But I think this really goes into this. We were discussing a certain technology, and this person brought up an example of how this large prime put the kibosh on a better technology that was developed by some SBIR company because that prime division within that prime had the benefit. Uh, the the component was better, wasn't cheaper necessarily, but it wasn't much more expensive than what they specifically used. Um, let's call it a wheel some wheel or something. It wasn't, but some widget, something like that. It was better. Um, However, the Prime got so much more money from the maintenance contracts for the old technology that they did not want to approve the spec for the new product. That's a big burden, a big hurdle to get through when you're selling something into, if they owned as the prime, kind of the main manufacturer, even though the Defense Department needed this. So that's just kind of a real example. Again, it wasn't as specific as I could make it because I can't disclose a lot of the stuff. But that's just one, another kind of example in this kind of world of that really happening for sure. And this I put, I plugged in a few different kind of additional slides here too. Um, these I do not use these components. These are from Salesforce add-ons. I've used Salesforce before as a customer relationship management system. These are some screenshots. So again, hence they're a little blurry because I actually grabbed them from a couple of the websites, and actually I put them in the slide notes. I'll make sure if you guys are interested in them. But these are just add-on components to Salesforce because what Dale is talking about is so applicable that as you are capturing information about your clients, um, there are companies that actually create these influence map things that you can make sure that you are keeping those relationships in check, and knowing about those so that everybody in your team, when you grow bigger, but now you guys, founder sales is the most important sales because you guys are going to lead the rest of the sales throughout your company's career, right? That top down is really going to be important. I think it can have a very big effect in the culture of your sales going forward, even though you're going to eventually want other people to take over that role for sure. But this type of thing is very helpful. It helps you to understand within an account, right? Within an organization, whether it's the DoD or your civilian market accounts, who's part of this decision-making process. If you get into an account, and I'm going to be assumptive here, it's not a bad assumption. When the people that I talk to, the people that I work with, you guys are creating complex technology. Your sales process falls under that umbrella of complex sales. most of the companies that this is not transactional. You're not probably going to set up an e-commerce site and you're just going to get a few orders here and there. Something about what you guys are building is going to involve multiple touch points and typically multiple people on the other end on the organization that you're working with, and partners and et cetera. So it's a complex sales process. So this is one of those ways that you can actually keep it in check. I'll talk a little bit later about bringing in a CRM, but you can use Lucidchart, you can use Word or whatever, as Dell mentioned, putting something together in this way is going to be helpful to you guys as you're stepping back and having some of these, both identifying markets and companies that you want to get into, as well as if you have an active sale opportunity in process, how you're going to proceed. What do you need? Who on your team do you need to help? Does someone need convincing from a technical standpoint? Does someone need convincing from an operational implementation standpoint, et cetera? And as Dell and I both mentioned, is there someone who doesn't like what you're doing? How do we understand them and how do we flank that, either their influence on the decision-making process or kind of bring them into the fold somehow? So that's my little geeking out with that. And Dell, you added some things here. I want to let you talk, and then I added a couple of books that I think are really helpful for people too, if you aren't familiar with them.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I just added were I think there's this is a video, right?
That's
I
actually
think the
that's
first
just
one.
no, neither none of those are videos. That's actually just a blog post from Steve Blank, but
Okay.
then it links to the PEO directory, and that PEO directory is updated regularly. I'll let you talk about it as we.
Yeah. So as Ann mentioned, it's a blog post. It actually covers a lot of these stuff just in more detail about what we just talked about kind of tracing through that when you're selling something to an organization like the Department of War, what do you need to keep in mind about the hurdles that you are going to face between we won this award, we're developing this product, they want to buy this from us. Covers a couple really interesting tidbits, particularly in, if I'm remembering correctly, it covers a lot in that kind of scalability issue, kind of knowing how do you need to start making these key assumptions and key decisions about we can make 10 of these. Department of War is going to want 100,000 of these
Yeah.
every quarter. What do we need to start thinking about? A good thing that I always tell people when they're facing that scalability issue, and it's touched on in the blog post, is kind of the best way to actually do it is not from the start to the end. It's actually from the end to the beginning. Work the problem backwards. Think about it from my customer uses this. Awesome. What's included in that? What do they need to be able to use it effectively? What actually goes in the quote unquote box when you deliver it to them, when you actually sell it to them? Well, how do we get this into their hands? There's going to have to be a transition point. There's going to have to be some logistics. Is there someone else that we're going to have to work with on those logistics? So one of the key things you need to kind of start doing is making assumptions and then kind of testing and validating those assumptions. And the blog post goes into just what is different about when you sell not only to the government, because government sales is a very specific thing, but what is different even from government sales towards departmental sales to someone like, the Department of War. And as Ann mentioned, the other thing in there is the PEO directory. PEO stands for, depends on which service component you're with. It's either Program Executive Office or Program Executive Officer, depending on if it's a person or a department. But these are the ones that actually get the money. These are the ones that make the programs of record. These are the ones that are the overseers and kind of oversights. You don't really sell something to the Navy. You sell it to a PEO within the Navy. And each of those PEOs have a different focus. As Ann mentioned at the start of the course and kind of in talking about the setup of the course, I worked at the New Mexico FAST site for many years, and we always ran a innovation summit in the December timeframe, and it was actually with Department of Navy, and they always had 6 or 7 different PEOs that would come. And the problems they talked about, the topics they had, the focus on what was important to them vastly changed between those PEOs because you were talking about from what they call littoral combat ships towards, submarines, towards, aircraft carriers and, battleships and even oversight. Each one of those offices, the problems they had and what they were looking for and how you even delivered to them radically changed based on the PEO it came out of. So if you're doing sure, I gave you the Navy topic, but the other service components work off of the PEO system too. Whether it's Air Force, whether it's Army, I guess you could say whether the Marines, although technically Marines falls under Navy, but whatever. Or whether it's Space Force, although again, Space Force is part of Air Force, but each one of these has that kind of different focus. And in a very similar fashion, doing business with NASA, again, doing government business is one thing, doing business with Department of War is one thing, doing business with NASA is an entirely different one. The way that NASA sources technologies, the way that they purchase products goes through a lot more, let's just call it requirement scope and regulation scope than it would if you were delivering to the 108th Airborne, because NASA has a lot bigger, not necessarily fish to fry, but how they operate and what they do changes the landscape rapidly. You launch a moon mission, you're strapping 6 astronauts to, essentially kind of some of the biggest bombs we have ever built, and you hope that they make it. So what's that actually require for NASA to buy something like that? What does it actually require for them to build something like that? How do they go through those processes, those understanding points, and what makes it a key decision on you develop this, we might like this, but you have so much more work to do before we will actually be able to buy this from you. And then I think you added the other 2 links on here, right, Ann?
Yeah, yeah. And I want to kind of touch on these the first two here, guys, Ann's take on this as well. That PEO directory was started a couple of years ago by Steve Blank, folks at Stanford and Silicon Valley VC folks. It's actually evolving more. Actually, the current versions I've noticed they have like almost like a mini training in the front pages too. They're actually adding some DOE things in there and maybe some other contacts. The focus though is the Department of War. How would I use this as someone who's want to explore customer discovery? It has names. It doesn't have contact information, but it has the names of people that are overseeing these different program offices, right? So if you are doing counter UAS types of things, if you are doing something that is appropriate for any of the Marines and focused on littoral environments or whatever, right? You are probably going to find contacts within them. Does that mean that you automatically have an in and you can call them up and say, "Hey, Bob, let me talk to you about what I'm doing"? No, but it's part of that customer discovery. It's part of you helping to understand how to navigate and what programs actually would be using it. So you can also, find some time to reach out, to have some of the conversations with some of those players, some of the people that are involved with that. And then there's obviously more expansive people, but that's really kind of that very important person, the VIP type of levels, and then the program officer. So I love this type of thing. And it was put together by Steve Blank and team for the very reason. It used to be a very black box understanding who to contact within the DoD to really try to understand if you have some type of alignment with what you're building with the problems that they have and get those people in. Now, kind of another step over to NASA. I'll give you an example. A company that I recently worked with, they got SBIR funding from NASA recently in the last couple of years, phase 1 and phase 2. And we were talking, And they said, Ann, God, what do we do? And I said, hey, you've got these conversations with your folks at NASA. Keep talking to them. That's where you're going to understand um, how what you're building aligns with with what they need. And I cannot stress enough that those ability to actually speak directly with the people that are experiencing, trying to address the problems, the solutions that need to be built for NASA, for the DoD, for whatever component. Um, if you can get in there, of course, did it tee them up? Were they in any more special position than any of you? Absolutely not. They were newbies to SBIR, all of this stuff, but they made those contacts. In fact, when I first started talking to them, they had not had those contacts. I said, I need you to identify people within NASA that you can talk to about this problem. They did that. They continued. They did one NASA at first. SBIR was not funded. The next time they did a submission, they had had so many more conversations with them, and they really had refined the approach to make sure that it was very appropriate for what NASA needed. And lo and behold, they were funded. So that I can't stress enough how helpful that is, right? It's just because then it's just that human to human stuff, right? It's, hey, we're trying to help you, help me help you, right? Let us try to make sure that you're aligning what you're building so that it's addressing that need that they actually have. The other two links that we have on this, and again, I'll post those. I'll put that up in the folder after this class. I reserve the right to not send slides until we've delivered them because I'm always tweaking and changing things. Um, but our two books, and there's probably many others, but just about, selling into government entities. And I definitely, the first one I've done deep dive, I actually just learned is a fourth edition, but an insider's guide to winning government contracts as well, by Joshua Frank, is another one I actually want to dig in more to, but these both have really great pieces of information about how to really build those relationships with government partners. So that's really what I wanted to say for those. So highly recommend that you check those books out. Thanks. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I don't have my slides up in front of me. So my recommendation, use a CRM now. How many, if you can, if you want to, or you could answer or not. I'd love to know if you guys are using a CRM, what you're using. There are going to be, if you're doing defense contracting, there are probably going to be some special setups that you want, or and things to consider. But if you're young, if the company is new, I don't have a lot of money to invest in some of these, there are some lower cost. I'm going to always say when we're talking about defense contracting, there are things that you want to make sure that you have good security protections, et cetera, on everything that you do. But what a CRM, a customer relationship management system, is going to do, all of them have bells and whistles. Like, and I was in that world in the latter part of my sales career, marketing stuff, all of that stuff. That's cool. What I really want you to focus on is really, how do I make sure that I'm tracking every single freaking conversation that I have with people that are involved in buying software, making decisions. People, they may not be ready to buy anything or do anything with you at the moment, but track all of the people that you come into contact. You will thank me later. Take flight notes for every single conversation that you have. You will thank me later, even if it's like weird chicken scratch that you're like, I don't think anybody else is going to be able to read it. When you see it, because we're visual, when you come back to it again, you're like, oh yeah, we had this conversation about this, this, and this, and I put a couple of, silly notes in there. But these low cost CRMs are probably not going to be as rugged as what you're going to need when you really are growing, but there's something to start with now. You'll eventually have a whole stack of technology for your company, for sure, if you don't already have it. But I put in here a few of the things that if I were doing this right now, I would want to know. I want to know that I want to have accounts organized, accounts. I want to have the people that work for those accounts organizations that could be program executive offices. So you can have a high level Navy, you can have, certain different program offices, information set up that way. But I want to know the people, I want to know their role title if they have one. I want to know their role in the selection. And one assumption right now is that, hey, I've got one product to sell, one core technology. So you could maybe default to, I'm trying to sell this one thing. So identify what is their role in selecting this type of thing as to the best you can know. Are some of these going to be blank initially? Probably, sure, sure. But fill in as much information as you can about everybody. Typically, you're going to have roles identified in the selection for later. And I'm going to go ahead. That is the call that came. Hold on just a minute. The package that I need to get. But some of these other things are going to be really, really important just to keep track of it. And that's really, if I can emphasize that enough, keep those flight notes. When you're awarded those first contract, though, then keep adding everybody that you come into contact with. And can I pause for just a minute and Dell, have you take over for that? Thanks,
Yep.
guys.
But yeah, as Anne was just mentioning, being able to track stuff, and this gets back into, the concept of being able to do things visually. At the heart of it, a CRM is just a way for you to be able to kind of surface this information for your own knowledge and kind of future pathway in a visual manner. Different CRMs do different things better than others. As Ann said, you could start with some free ones, upgrade into some paid ones, but kick the tires on a bunch of different ones. A lot of them have free versions that you can actually take for a trial. See which one actually works right for you and see which one, kind of works best for you. But we had a little bit of a mini exercise kind of scheduled, but looking where we want to be kind of on a time chart basis. So I'm actually going to skip over it. It was just walking you through kind of a example mapped towards defense for a specific topic on an influence map, but we'll include that in the slides that go out with people and kind of where those different items lay. So instead, we're actually going to dive into value proposition. So we talked a lot now. So the focus between what's a customer, what's an end user, who influences, and why you need to understand those kind of differences. And at the core of it, a couple of those things that are actually going to matter to you and why you want to start charting these things is the different values that people get out of it, the different benefits that they get out of it really change based on their relationship with your product, the problem, and the innovation that you're actually trying to develop. And we, at the heart of it, call that a value proposition. Because a value proposition is not necessarily what you're delivering to the customer, but it's how they benefit and why that benefit is impactful. Value propositions are very mapped towards the individual who will gain something from what you're doing. So remember, you have a lot of times in defense or space or other contracting agents, agency focuses, you'll have a customer and you have an end user. And each one of those is actually going to have a different value proposition that they want and a different value or benefit that you need to be able to bring to the table. So for a customer, it needs to be able to do this. A lot of times for a customer, we need to be able to save this. We need to be able to reduce this. We need to be able to transition this. There are always going to be those extrinsic, a lot of times, benefits that your solution is actually bringing to the table. And for an end user, they're often, almost always, an intrinsic. There's something that it specifically does for them. But that value proposition is why they would actually essentially pay money for it, or from an influence standpoint, why that end user would start to tell the person paying, hey, you need to do this instead because it does this thing better for me. It solves this. It gives me a really great way to kind of get this over to you. You put together things like, fact sheets. Okay, well, Here's what they're facing. It's this 40% reduction. We reduce that down to 20%. And that gives them an interesting fact about where you fit in things and what you might be able to deliver to them. But it's not really a value. It's what they actually gain from that 20%. So that 20% reduction frees up man hours over here, frees up funding over here. You can now actually dual use this piece of technology, kind of whatever it is. That fact actually drives towards something, again, either extrinsic or intrinsic, that they will benefit from. And a value proposition is something that always has to be tested and validated. Oftentimes people come into it with well, I'm going to do this and it's a benefit. But you're not the customer. You're not the one actually buying it. You're not the beneficiary either. Your company's the beneficiary of you making more money by having a customer and selling stuff, but are totally outside that value proposition chain. So you need to really start to do things like determining what that is, going out there and actually validating some of those assumptions, validating why they would choose you versus something else, which gets us into our next topic here, which is competition. Now, let's establish a real quick ground floor that a lot of times, particularly people developing brand new, unseen, unheard of technologies, you always have competition. I don't care if you just develop the time traveling DeLorean. There's some sort of competition out there. You either have indirect or you have direct competition. And direct competition are people that are doing the same thing that you're doing, but you do it better. Indirect are the people that are doing something entirely different, but it kind of serves the purpose. We see this a lot of time when people go, well, I wish there was something that did, solve this particular problem that I have, but I'll have to go with this alternative instead. They're solving it in alternative ways. And you know what? At the end of the day, sometimes that alternative way is just, oh, this problem sucks and we deal with it. We get around it. We do this instead. So even if it is the most novel, brand new thing, there's always competition out there because you are trying to change a customer mindset to either spend money a different way, or spend money in a way they're not used to gain something that they didn't realize that they needed a lot of times, or gain something new that they weren't, you know, commonly aware of. I have a thing on here. I bring it up every time I talk about competition. I'm just going to give you the highlight because we still got a lot of slides to move through in the next 30-ish minutes. But I always tell people, don't pull a Jurassic Park fallacy. People go, well, if you built Jurassic Park today, there's no other place that has dinosaurs. There is no competition. And cool. Sure,
Mhm.
there's no other place that has competition, but you know what Jurassic Park is? It's a theme park. Can you think of other theme parks? People spend money on entertainment. Is Jurassic Park enough of an interest and enough of a value that they'll take 3 to 4 years worth of Disney trips, movie nights, video games, it's all entertainment budget, and actually spend it on Jurassic Park instead? So you have to understand how people make their purchasing decisions and what influences those purchasing decisions to really get into who's my competition and how do I stand apart. Now, we're going to go through a couple slides here, but we're going to kind of just highly hit most of these
Mhm.
just because it's the difference between competition and kind of value proposition. And really the driver is knowing the difference that you make from the competition, what they deliver is really how you start thinking about value proposition. Again, you want to do a lot of this stuff visually to fully get the picture. Doing something like a comparison chart really lets you understand where you sit in that kind of matrix of people could go with this thing and it does these. People can go with this thing and it does these. People could just suffer for the problem. and this happens, but this doesn't happen. But you don't need to list like every single, competitor under the sun, because again, competition is vastly, differentiated, it's nuanced, there's a whole lot of different things to do. But kind of pick those top ones and think of those kind of players that dominate the market, particularly in defense. And gave you a really good indicator earlier when she talked about primes. A lot of times, some of your competition is going to be those primes. So you may not be a direct competitor for like a Lockheed, but they may be doing something that you really need to be aware of about how you're going to change, maybe the way they do it, maybe the way they approach stuff. That's kind of competition for you. And be aware of the state of the industry. So know what's being worked on, kind of know what's next and what's upcoming. So again, just a real quick, visual tool. This is something like a comparison chart. I think that I actually made this available in a note. If not, I'll make sure I link over the source for this. But it's a really good way to kind of just fill this out. Well, one thing I don't necessarily like on here is that it calls it features. It's not really a feature. It should be an ability or capacity. It's something people are actually wanting it to do. Where does the company or where does your company and your solution fit? Where do competitors fit? And kind of know how that actually drives that decision tree on can we give this up to get this? And, you know, then you need to actually start going out there and you need to actually start validating that. You have these ideas on what we're delivering, why people would care, who else we're stacked up against. And so how do you start doing that? Well, you go out there and you have to just talk to people. If you're an introvert, that's going to be one of the worst things that you're actually going to start to do is you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to talk to people. And you have to go talk to people a lot. And you have to go talk to people often. And that's the only real way that you can do that. Now, again, keep in mind that, both doesn't, yeah, a DHS doesn't have a pre-release, but NASA and, DoD/DOW definitely still do. Your pre-release is your period and your time point where you can actually go talk to people. You can go talk to these TPOCs. You can get them to answer. You can ask them questions. Now, when they have something like a reference point and they reference a particular company that does something, that ain't part of the pre-release. You can contact that company at any time and talk to them, ask them questions. But this entire process is called customer discovery or customer validation. And sure, you want to do this before your phase one proposal. You know else? When else will you want to do this? All the time for your company. Customer discovery and customer validation is something you will do throughout the lifetime of not that product, but your business. You will always be doing it. Even my company, I do customer discovery and customer validation all the time. Talk to different organizations, have outreach with people, go talk to people and be like, oh, well, what did you actually need here? What was this thing that kept you from being able to do this? How did that burden you? Where did you actually see that burden point? You're going to start to gather what they call data, which is those answers to questions. And then you're going to actually come up with what we call an insight, which the insight is how it transforms your understanding, your potential, and your pathway based on what that information told you. You're always going to have pivots based off of these. If you ever go out there, you go talk to a customer, you doing customer discovery, you ask them questions, they give you data, you transform that into an insight, and you had 0 pivot points, you probably didn't do it right. There was something else you should have asked. There was something you should have dove deeper into. And there was somebody probably else you should have talked to. Because although we call this customer discovery, you're not just talking to customers. You actually want to talk to that entire influence map. So not just the customers, the end users, the decision makers, the influencers, heck, even the saboteurs. Everybody is a valid target to find out more about this ecosystem you're going to have to play in and how you carve out your niche into or niche of this ecosystem for yourself. So a couple of key things here, and I want to get through the last just couple of slides here quickly so we can dive into the next section. But we talked about customer discovery. Customer discovery is a thing that you have to practice to get better. Here are some things that are good things to try to emulate, but you have to figure out for yourself how customer discovery works best for you. Because it is just a process. It's a process, and you will learn to get better. You will learn things to do. But it's a process where you're finding out problems. You're asking them about gaps. You're seeing if a certain thing is actually possible. You're finding out how that environment changes, how they operate. Um, you're doing a lot of those steps to just question them. One of the things that should definitely happen in customer discovery is one, you don't try to sell them a solution because you're not finding out about the solution. You're finding out about what they need to actually enable a solution to work for them. And another thing that should happen big time during customer discovery is you should talk 10% and you should listen 90%. Although we call this customer discovery, you go, well, you're going to ask a lot of questions. Sure. But you're going to you're going to listen a heck of a lot more than you're actually going to ask questions because you're asking leading questions. You're asking things that allow you to broaden conversation and dive into tidbits. If you've ever seen a really good interviewer, when they ask a question, they just don't wait for the interviewee to actually finish. They pay attention to the answer. And then they find that trail of thought that they can actually lead into. Uh, Hollywood star says something in an interview chair, and the interviewer goes, "Well, that's really interesting because of this. How does that, make you feel? What do you think about that based on how you feel about this?" It's always there's that follow-up question that you can actually find and you can actually drive down in towards. So it's a multi-tier process. First, you find the customer for those topics. It's really great. That TPOC is in there, but that's just the TPOC. And again, you want to talk to that entire environment and that entire kind of surrounding. So you need to find the end user. Doing things like Google searches whenever you're doing this actually for that transition period from defense customer to open, market customer. You're going through and, maybe you're traveling to events, going to things like industry days, connecting with people through LinkedIn. You at least need to bridge the door for communication. And then you talk to them, you're gathering data, you're turning it into insights. One's not more important than the other. Both of these go hand in hand. But as you're doing it, you're always planning 2 to 3 moves in the future. You're taking notes. You're referencing those notes back. As Ann talked about with the CRM, when you make those connections, when you have those conversations, you're logging everything. You should be doing something very similar when you're asking these customer discovery type questions. They're telling you about something that they actually source from somewhere else. Cool. You know who you should probably go talk to then? The people they source that from. What do they actually see? What's actually impacting here? What's this thing? Why do they need it? What does it actually do? What does it deliver? What is this kind of, supply chain, or is there any logistics constraints that you should actually be aware of? And even in the conversation, you're digging down those 2 to 3 steps. You're going, okay, well, I want to find out about this. We'll lead with this. They say, yeah, when we're out on those littoral combat ships, one of the things that actually happens is we get this really weird vibration at, 20 knots or higher. Okay. Well, what's that vibration leading to? Is that actually a worry for them for maintenance? Is it a worry for them for operation? You're diving down into that fact because now you have a leading point for something that they really want to gain. Something that is they've actually expressed as maybe a worry, maybe a concern. So you're always paying attention. You're always thinking through I really want to find out more about this. I probably can't ask them a direct question. How else should I get there? What else do I need to find out about this? And kind of figure out about the things that enable it, the things that kind of surround it. Um, and then, just a couple more key tips when we talk about the way this process works. Really, we call these are known as interviews. Don't interview the same person kind of multiple times. Um, it's fine to do it maybe twice, but if you keep going back to the same person multiple times, six, seven times, at some point you're differentiating too far down the line. You need to actually broaden out kind of what you were doing and who else that you are actually talking to. And I teed it up, but customer discovery is again a bit of a misnomer. It focuses entirely on the customer. You really should talk to the customer, but you should talk to everybody else that is a part of that influence map to always find out, always learn more, and always learn how this could potentially impact the way that you do business and a lot of times how much business you can actually do.
Guys, before we go on here, guys, another and take thing. Um, I put in the chat, just some of the like the OG customer discovery. Literally, the original was Steve Blank's Four Steps to the Epiphany. He formed the company called Epiphany, which got acquired, changed names. I can't remember where it is now. So those are a couple of the resources, right? Uh, Customer discovery. You've heard this. You guys have heard of iCore. I am certain of it. Some of you have participated in it. Adele said, this is kind of an ongoing thing. From a sales standpoint, from a product development standpoint, from a founder standpoint, schedule time to do it, you guys. Um, you have a lot. You have a fire hose of stuff that you're dealing with. You have so many things to deal with it. This is not going to happen unless you put a block in your calendar to make sure that, okay, hey, I'm going to make 5 phone calls this morning to try to reach out to some of these contacts that I've identified and have these conversations. So that's my 2 cents in terms of structuring real world. How do we actually execute on these types of things instead of, again, as I mentioned, this is like, these are those kind of messy real world, here's what you've got to do type of things, not just, hey, us telling you pie in the sky types of, this is what it is and this is how you do it. I'm going to recommend put some time in your calendar to do that work because it's easy to not do it. I'm an introvert, surprisingly enough. I go and curl up in a fetal position after I have to present an extrovert for long periods of time. But when you approach this customer discovery, again, you kind of take having it not be a sales situation, and I love sales, having it not be that sale, having it really just informative, like, hey, I really want to understand what you're facing, how this is impacting you. Tell me more about this is really part of that initial customer discovery, product market fit. If you already have a product out in the market space and you're just trying to make sure you're refining it, they really go hand in hand. But when you take that kind of pressure off of them and you really can have some incredibly wonderful conversations. Just saying. Thanks.
Yeah, and as Ann was just saying, it's just something that if you don't feel comfortable with it, you just kind of have to get used to it. Eventually you'll find your niche, you'll find your groove. It's funny that Ann, you were like, oh, I'm an introvert. Ann knows that, I've done multiples of these. I do,
Mhm.
workshops, webinars all the time. I've spoken at events, I've emceed events, I've done all that stuff. I talk to people on a near constant basis. In my personal life, my perfect week is I talked to nobody at all. I am an extreme introvert. I don't want to talk to people, but this is part of my job. It's what it requires. I find that kind of groove that allows me to operate, and then I'm, I don't know, maybe successful with it. Other people are the best judges of that, but
Mhm.
you have to go out there and you have to kind of break out of that shell and go, okay, well, I don't really like doing this, or I don't think I have the best abilities or capabilities to do this. And you also don't want to just go, okay, well, I need people to go find out about customers. Cool, I'll go hire people.
Ooh,
You need to be
yeah.
able to build this ability yourself because you know it best, you know your business best, and you're the one that's going to make the best decisions to drive your business forward.
Thanks. I'll let you go. We'll go on to pivoting because I could stay on that topic all
Oh
day.
yeah. Um, okay, so let's get through pivoting here. And hopefully very quickly. Um, a lot of these things that we've already actually talked about
Mhm.
actually with pivoting, so it's a good thing. But essentially, when we talk pivoting, all we're talking about is thinking broader. Again, customers are this contracting agent is going to be your first customer. They're not going to be your only customer. So, what is this thing that we actually need to modify for what we're doing, how we're doing it, or how we're going about it that changes our customer, changes our market, and because remember, value propositions are matched to specific customers, it's really actually going to change your value proposition. It's going to require more customer discovery, more actually customer validation, but you want to be able to think through okay, not the core, what is the enabling factor of our technology, of our innovation? What does it really do? When you broaden this out, what else can we do? You actually see this all the time when you look at a lot of different like SBIR and STTR success stories. Companies that got funded to do one specific thing, and then they took that core of innovation, that idea on what that differentiator is and why that enablement mattered for more people. And then they were able to create entire, product lines, entirely new products, sometimes even spin off new business units that actually focused on that. So it was them actually taking a core of something and figuring out what is the unique element here and how can we take that unique element and maybe copy it over into different applications, different utilizations that enables us to do more business, better business, whatever there. So when we think pivoting, there's a concept that I always like to talk to people about. And it's not just pivoting for products, it's also really good whenever you're looking at across different types of agencies is to take a two steps up and a two steps down methodology. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into that, I think, on the next slide here. But two steps up means you're making it available for kind of more customers and more markets. And two steps down, you're focusing on enabling additional transition pathways based off what you are delivering. So that two steps up is how you enable a entirely new product. And that two steps down is how you expand on your product line, expand that actually kind of breadth of it, and that depth of it to be able to address to more people in the same manner and address these same people in a different manner. Um, you can also do kind of sidestepping. So rather that linear up and down, you can also sidestep into something that is a different approach, a different fit, or a different focus. Because when you think product are just revenue drivers and kind of revenue enablers. Your solution doesn't need to fit just one very specific thing, and it actually shouldn't. You want to be able to do that thing where you go, okay, well, this section of it, we could actually have a prime that could acquire this in the future. We could license it out to another entity and to create their own things that are in a separate space as us that we don't want to get into. We're developing a new process or a new workflow that people are going to buy. All of those things that you could actually take and tweak on what your innovation does can be either radically new products in and of themselves or address a different capability that you actually expand on the customer base. You actually go from project managers that handle 5 to 10 projects a year to project managers that handle 50 to 100 different projects a year because you go, okay, well, version A is for this, crowd. Version B is for this crowd because they need X, Y, and Z bolted on. So when we're thinking about pivots, it's just how you enable more revenue to be driven off of your, product offerings without reinventing the wheel. So just a kind of little context here, because it's always hard to think through like, abstract concepts whenever we're talking about things like, okay, well, what do we mean when we talk about like this 2 steps up and 2 steps down? Or what do we mean when we're talking about the pivots? So let's say that you're developing a new algorithm for self-driving cars, and yes, I use bad science words in here, but it's infinitely accurate and infallible. Yes, you can argue that nothing's ever infallible. You can't get infinitely accurate. This is a movie. Let's take it like that. So you're developing this new algorithm, and you go, okay, my product is this algorithm for self-driving cars. Tesla is going to want this. Volkswagen, who are doing a lot of self-driving stuff, they're going to actually want to license this from me. They're going to want to include it in their cars. Great. That is one product for you. But what happens when Tesla, maybe develops their own and doesn't want to use yours anymore? Well, that completely cut out that product and that product line. So you need to think about well, how else can this fit? What else can this do? What does this actually enable? And maybe something that it enables is the way that it's actually transferring information. There's this really cool algorithm that you developed at the backbone of how the algorithm works and what it enables systems to do is this new data stacking, protocol that you developed, that the calculation and signal processing are out of this world. Nobody's ever seen it before. Okay, so now that's the taking it 2 steps up. Your particular product is this algorithm for self-driving cars. But when you think about it, your actual product is this data stacking protocol. So where else does that fit? You know, it reduces, practice on object detection and permanence to plane mapping and geometry. Anybody that works in, LiDAR systems, anybody that works in visual recognition systems, anybody that works in, you know, uh, AI, for being able to transcribe, scanned images and scanned text, that would probably be super interesting to them. Anybody that's dealing with large data transfer rates, that ability to kind of stack the data for quicker signal processing, probably be super interesting to them. Sure, you used your product to actually develop this self-driving car algorithm, but when you get to it, there's so many more things that you can do. Now that's also increased your ability to get funding because the self-driving car algorithm, we think about it SBIR and STTR. Sure, Department of Transportation. They might actually be able to fund that. Also a contracting agency, but we won't go into that. But they might fund that. Department of Energy is probably not going to fund that. Department of Defense slash Department of War, maybe. NASA, probably not. But this object permanence, that's going to be interesting to a lot of people. DOW, NASA, NOAA, DHS, probably Department of Energy, more than likely USDA. Now you've broadened out who might actually be able to provide you funding to get this idea off the ground to enable products across an entire breadth and scope of different ways. And you can also do this kind of in a flip fashion, thinking that down the chain, thinking through the different chains that you have. This is just a really good exercise for you to think about the different buckets, where the heart of your innovation actually lies, and what that enables for the future of your company and the future of kind of products that you are intending and products that you're actually wanting to take forward. And I think you have a handful of slides here, Ann.
I do. I have a couple here. So thanks, Dell. I'm doing a little bit of a different take on that. And I was telling Dell beforehand, I was like, actually, I wanted to put a different take. And I think probably I'm going to say what you're saying in a little bit different way. I actually think of pivots in early tech sales as really a deliberate shift, right? An actual strategic reset. It is you're taking that pivot, not just planning ahead for product development, enhancements, iterations, differences to address the market need, and again, maybe that's the same thing, but I consider a pivot is like something's not working. We need to shift. And one of the first examples is 100% of you are going to change something. In my experience with clients that I've supported here with SBIR, when I talk to people after they get their awards and they've delivered on their awards, I said, tell me something. Have you changed? Did you change anything about from when you did your phase one proposal to what you have now after you've completed phase two or gone on beyond? And they're like 100%. And they've either shifted who their customer is, intended, their vision of who the customer is, what problem they're addressing, or something shifts in their technology. They realize, God, this isn't going to quite deliver what we need to. So I consider that pivot a little bit more tactically, strategically focused on something that you need to change in what you're doing to make sure that you get the revenue that you want, that you're delivering the product that you want to the people that you need to deliver it to. So it could be targeting a different customer. It could be that you have the same product, and I guess this is kind of in the same way, but the story has to be different. You're solving something, differently for them, or they don't care about this part of the widget. It was some other benefit that really is what you really need to lean into. So those are a couple of the things there. Again, it's really kind of different. It's triggered though, typically because God, I'm not getting the traction. Something isn't, people aren't adopting what I want. They're not picking up what I'm putting down type of thing. So go ahead if you want to go to the next one and I'll try to, and if there looks like there may be a note here. I'm sorry, I don't have, for some reason, my thing. There we go. Pivot before starting. Once a team has decided they should move forward, they come up with all kinds of asking for additional ideas. Those should be captured, deliveries, fine, now, later, another project. Great. And for some reason, I'm having a difficult time with my thing. Cynthia, thank you for sharing that. I love that. Love that. This is kind of that spin, that conversation when Dell is we're talking about our civilian and commercial, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Yeah, living the dream, Cynthia, perfect. Dual use is what we're talking about here, right? You're going to have your first customer, typically, if your product is not yet developed and you're seeking DoD funding, is going to be one of those components there. And I talk about this, and I want to be careful that I don't overemphasize that. They want you to deliver for them, but do not discount the fact that they also want you to stay in business, and they're going to recommend possibly, or they expect you to find that other market for this technology as well. So I hope though that dual use, especially when you're early, when you're young, when you're nascent, is that doesn't completely bifurcate your company. At some point when you're big enough and you have the bandwidth and the money to support different kind of divisions or processes, you may do that. But really, you're talking about dual use means that your technology can address both civilian and commercial applications, civilian commercial applications, as well as military defense or NASA, for example. It's not binary. It's really more of a spectrum, right? But clearly here, and as this slide indicates, of course, if you have ITAR on your DoD topic, whatever you deliver to the DoD, they're not going to let you deliver that to the civilian market space, right? Those are things that are going to have to be addressed, and those are realities that you will plan into your future go-to-market strategy for the civilian side. It is really important to diversify, have a number of different customers, but I'm going to say from a sales standpoint, practice. You guys, you do you. I always tell people, you do you. I'm going to tell you, there are going to be times when I'm going to say, dial in, guys. I offered a book and I can't remember the title. I'll think about it. But it's go in on a plan A until you realize I got to pivot. This isn't going to work. Because if you're too spread out, if you have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, you know what? You guys are going to be, I would be, I'll just speak for myself, too indecisive. I'm like, God, fear of missing out, but maybe this is the better thing. Let's try to check off why certain things may not work about a certain plan or something like that. Take what works but don't abandon certain plans too quickly. And then you're going to say, but Anne, when do I abandon the plan? We can talk about that later. But I do want you to kind of focus in on if you feel like the target's right, do what you need to do to try to acquire those early stage companies. Those early stage sales, those early customers that you get are going to be some of your best, whether they are your worst customers or your best customers in terms of feedback. They're going to give you information that's going to help inform the rest of your customer or your company and the future. But of course, what you're going to be doing is designing for that harder spec first. Then you're going to downshift. Then you're going to look at what are I need to be compliant for the government, but what are the civilian market opportunities? Is there FDA approval? Are there other FAA? Are there other approvals that I'm going to need to do to sell this to the civilian market space? For example, if you're doing something in unmanned systems, drones, for example, how big is your drone? Do you have FAA requirements where the military wouldn't require that type of thing? Those are things that you're going to have to consider. And then set up, of course, your kind of internal sales channels to be tracking kind of how you're talking about things in different ways to either your military or other federal partners and your civilian opportunities. So next slide. Yeah, and this is kind of maybe like Dell's exercise, my exercise. Here are some things that you can actually kind of go through as you're looking at, God, how do I even explore some of these companies or these opportunities in the civilian market? I'm just so dialed in on what the DoD says that they want right now. Start with your technology. Don't start with the people. We sit there and talk. This is going to be a contradiction to things I've said before. Get to know your customer. Get to know the person delivering for the DoD. Who, imagine that DoD person. What do they need, right? Right now, if I'm trying to change to another market space, thinking about that, what is it about your technology that is helpful? What type of performance properties does that have? That just can expand and what problems do those address? Then we're going to tie that to the populations that do that. Take a look at it in specific industries. For example, I think I have it somewhere else, probably in the notes here. You might be developing something that I'll give an example of a company. It's Mag Drive Technologies. They developed a magnetic actuated valve that can really contain hyper cooled liquids. It can prevent regolith or dust and things like that from entering in and mucking up and messing up and destroying the valve capabilities of something that normal mechanical valves would be just torn apart by the way they did that. When they're looking at NASA is funding them, they're thinking about low Earth orbit and even outer space missions. What other types of industries might need a valve that is really strong like that? Well, oil and gas is another one, obvious, right? So think of the industries, for example, in what you're doing when you've just broken down just the technology. What other industries might that align with? And then map those, go through a process of kind of mapping out what they need and what kind of similar to the competition matrix, kind of create a matrix where you're tracking here are the capabilities that we have. Here's what industry DoD needs. We built it for them, but here's oil and gas, for example. Here's what they need, and see how you can align that way. Study other companies. Brian, just not that it's not in your world, but there's a company called Outdoor Research that has a huge kind of REI like, just tons of incredible, rugged, technology, technologically advanced outerwear, you know, things for companies or people who are doing rugged adventure types of things. But they started with certain gloves to address a DoD need of these hyper cooled things. And there's an incredible cool story about outer research based in Seattle. Um, but that's an example of they leverage that DoD need, but they've gone to a whole civilian market space. So take a look at that in your area and find, do searches on SBIR.gov or others and look at those similar companies that are in your space and see what they're doing. Who are they selling to in the civilian market space? It might give you some ideas about how you can approach it as well, or talk to them, especially if they're not competitive. Call them up and say, how'd you do that? Might not do it quite that way, but people love to talk about their success stories and their journeys. And then again, go back to those discovery conversations, talk about, try to identify those people. And there's a couple of things that I want to really hit on this that I love on this, the next ones. Um, Find some of those people that are outside of your original target market, continue with some of those customer discovery types of conversations. Um, People that are not already buying from you or people that are buying from you. This next one, number 5, is I should highlight this. And this is from my experience. I wonder if any of you have had this experience. Um, it's the one that's freaking surprising and it's lovely. When you get some inbound signal from a customer, maybe, or someone who you didn't even know needed something. And they said, hey, have you thought about doing this? Um, I'm going to give you 2 examples. One example I had when I was running through, and let me see. Oh, I'm going over. I'm sorry. I'm keeping you late. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to give you my examples because that would be such a tease. Example, I was selling some technology that handled large transactional systems for large banks. So email, but it was to send your bank statement or email marketing or some triggered notification type of thing. Working with one of our customers, and they said, "Hey, have you ever done? Have you thought about doing transport layer security? That's becoming more and more important to us." This was years ago. We hadn't even thought about it, but it really became a very important core part of our product. Eventually, just by someone saying, bringing something out like that. I was just at a meeting this morning with the Montana Department of Commerce and some legislators, and there was someone who came in. Um, Bye, Cynthia. Thank you. Sorry, I'm going long a little bit here on this, guys. But this person who joined the conversation was doing some ranching, and one of their surprising product lines came out of just that type of thing. They had someone who said, "Hey, could you give us this?" It was not in their product scope. It wasn't on their vision, their plan, or anything, but they could do it, and it did align with what they wanted to be doing. And those are just those examples of be really open to listening to whether or not, if a customer or someone else comes to you with an idea. I can't say enough that those type of fortuitous interactions can really be defining. And you're not going to know right now what happens with those. And then we've already talked about, you're going to have to change what you deliver to the DoD to what you can deliver to those other markets as well. But thank you guys for taking that time. Where are we? Do
So
we
I was actually going to
take
call an
that?
audible, because
Yeah,
we only have like 3 slides left, which are the next
yeah,
section, which are
yeah.
about, you know, that differentiation between your customer and the commercial market. But when
We
I
can
think
push that
about it,
into,
that's
yeah,
talking about market.
yeah.
Market is
Let's
our
talk
next
next. Yeah,
session. So we're
let's,
going to flip those 3 slides. So right now,
yeah.
we're going to flip to next week and just a
Maybe we will.
suggestion on an activity. So,
Yeah, yeah.
next week we're going to talk about commercialization data, being able to identify stuff for proposals like market data, those kind of strategies, doing the things that actually make sense. So we're going to talk about the three slides we didn't get to about that,
Hmm.
commercialization versus
I'll
commercial
move
market
them.
then.
Hmm.
But one, potential thing you can do to actually start this guidance that, Ann and I talked about and kind of talked about throughout is for your company, create two influence maps. One for your government customer and one for if I was actually going to push this to somebody else, what would it be? Who would I go talk to? Where do I think that the intersections lay and, these connection points are? And just start to validate it. Go out there, do some Google searches, start with a blank map first for yourself and build it yourself without actually doing some searching. Then go out there and actually do some searching, see if it aligns, see where the gaps are. Because what you do for that government customer and look at those gaps where you didn't think of something, where you didn't plan around it, where you didn't know, is actually highly, highly going to mimic the same thing for any other customer, any other kind of market, anything
Hmm.
like that. So start to figure out where your blind spots are and what you really want to pay attention to as you're kind of moving forward with your idea, moving forward with a potential product, and hopefully moving forward with success.
Yeah, yeah. And guys, again, thank you guys for staying a little bit later. I want to put a little bit of a plug in for next week too. Dell has really prepped some incredible content, some incredible information. One thing that we're going to expand upon too a little bit is probably at phase one, it's not needed as much, but when you get to phase two, for most of the agencies even, and not just DoD, they're going to want you to put into some of those kind of cost projections, finance projections, your revenue projections, and we're going to give you some tactics for how you kind of really start thinking about that and developing those for your business, for your company, and for addressing what you will estimate for your phase two. And I think that's one of the things that really sticks with some people that really kind of you know makes them stop a little bit like, hey, I'm just guessing here, Anne. And I'm like, yeah, you probably are, but we can actually make sure that you get some pretty good information there that you can use both for your business, but also to share with the DoD or the other agency. So that's another thing that we really didn't have in that list there that I think is going to be beneficial for you next week as well. So thanks everybody and appreciate your time. Have a great afternoon.